Boldwood presents In the Greek Midwinter, written by Mandy Baggot and read by Mira Dovreni. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. St. Agnes Church, Little Pickering, Wiltshire, UK.
Stick him with the sword! Right in the guts! Now, thrust and slice. Nathaniel, remember what we talked about. I want to see the menace begin in your soul, translate to the eyes, and come to absolute fruition in your sword. This is Herod you're fighting, the tyrant who ordered a massacre of innocents.
Geoffrey himself gave a roar from his position in the pews, the noise echoing all around the holy pillars and back again, startling Bonnie so much that she dropped half a mince pie right into Jen's lap. "Bonnie!" Jen exclaimed, brushing crumbs into her hand, and then wondering what she should do with them. "Sorry," her best friend replied, "but I wasn't quite ready for him to shout like he was introducing wrestling." Jen focused back on the dramatisation on the red carpet at the front of the church before a candlelit altar. While one of her hands held the pastry crumbs, the other was using a pen to make notes. And right now none of them were particularly positive. Had she given Geoffrey too much of a free rein on this project? Next, in a crescendo of cymbals, cellos and clarinets, many heads of plastic baby dolls rolled across the performance area like footballs. And then there was an explosion. What looked like blood burst from cylinders at either side of the stage, coating everything and everyone in range with bright red liquid. Bonnie screamed, the rest of her mince pie dropping to the floor, while Jen got to her feet, notebook and crumbs flying, shifting out of the pew. "Geoffrey, there's blood all over the church!" she shouted. "And the vicar has evensong in 20 minutes!" Geoffrey looked as if he needed some of the red liquid injected into him to replace what had drained from his face.
Those weren't meant to go off until the actual performance.
Jen surveyed the damage. Pools of red on the ancient flagstones. All Geoffrey's actors' faces covered and dripping like they had roles in Evil Dead. The beautiful grey stone pillars decorated with holly and ivy, now resembling a crime scene. And the performance had been way too dark, even for the Historical Society's Christmas party. It was going to have to be back to the drawing board for that, and somehow getting St. Agnes cleaned before the village congregation arrived. Bonnie whispered, arriving at Jen's shoulder, "That Paris is calling, and you must go." Jen sighed. "It seems I can't even go back to the office and brainstorm this dramatic piece until after I get elbow deep in Sillet Bang." "Think of Paris," Bonnie said, making her voice dreamlike, as if she were in a cutesy, fuzzy, festive TV commercial. "The romantic mist over the Seine. The creamy, sugar-sweet chocolat chaud. The Eiffel Tower. And David down on one knee with the kind of solitaire that every Disney princess dreams of." Currently, Jen's view was not the golden lights of France's most famous landmark, nor a ring to rival Aurora's. With this crimson concoction of Geoffrey's dripping off things she hoped didn't predate Dame Judi Dench, it was hard to remember that in a few days she wasn't going to be here in Little Pickering. "I can see it now," Bonnie carried on, as centurions or whatever it was Geoffrey's actors were supposed to be, palmed their faces, shaking blood-tinged fingers in the air. "Chocolate-filled croissants for breakfast. Chocolate-coloured poodles trotting around the boulevards. A cream and chocolate Chanel bag for your best friend's Christmas gift." The minutes were ticking by, and the vicar was nothing if not punctual. Geoffrey seemed to be stuck, like one of the statues of Jesus carved into the marble, mouth agape at the chaos he himself had created. There was only one thing for it, to lead by example. It was time for the CEO of Christmas Every Day to be the competent, capable and professional manager and business owner that she was. Jen shrugged off her bright red coat and pushed up the sleeves of her spruce green jumper. "Right now," Jen said to Bonnie, striding towards the door to the vestry, The only gift I'm looking for is the bucket-shaped kind. Chapter 2. Christmas Every Day, Little Pickering, Wiltshire, UK. Are you sure you don't want some? Bonnie had morsels of a Greggs triple chocolate muffin underneath her fingernails as she devoured the treat in Jen's car. Greggs was like Greggs, except it wasn't a national company. It was run single-handedly by Greg. And the business premises also combined the Little Pickering post office and an Amazon hub locker. Jen looked at her own hands. In comparison to Bonnie's, she had red staining under her fingernails that made her look like she had either had a fight with a bingo dabber or had murdered someone. She wasn't quite sure how she was going to get rid of it yet, and she had one last meeting before she could sign off for the evening. Not that she ever really signed off from work. Business owners didn't often get the luxury of clocking off, or particularly small businesses who relied on repeat business, reputation, and recommendation. Jen had managed to assure the vicar that if the staining on his altar cloths didn't come out in the wash, or if they returned like some sort of ode to the Turin shroud, she would hire a team of professional cleaners. But she wasn't certain he was going to let her use the church for rehearsal space again. You should just get Geoffrey to do the nativity, Bonnie said between bites. I've been organising the dramatic piece for this group for 4 years now, and we did a spin on the nativity in Year 1 and Year 3. Year 1 was the 3 wise hens, and Year 3 was What if Jesus had a twin? Christ! Bonnie exclaimed. I mean, not Christ. Actually, that was what we called the twin, Jen answered. How did I miss that one? Bonnie asked, licking her chocolatey fingers. Well, I think you were going through your salted caramel phase, Jen said. A bit like you're going through this chocolate phase now. Bonnie stopped chewing. Are you food-shaming me? No, Jen said. But back at the church, you said the word chocolate about 1 million times. And when you get that kind of obsessed about something, it usually means there's something on your mind. So why don't you tell me now, before we get to the point where you're locking yourself in one of my Christmas rooms with the Ferrero Rocher and pledging yourself to the ambassador? I did that once, Bonnie exclaimed, scrunching up her Greggs bag and dropping it onto Jen's rubber car mat. Jen waited, knowing her friend was about to open up. Bonnie had been opening up to her since they'd first met at the retirement home 5 years ago. Sitting on reception, Bonnie had lifted her head from the magazine tucked under her computer keyboard and asked Jen if she thought her face was square or oval, and if it was square, did she know any contour tricks? Over a week nursing home tea, their friendship had begun. Bonnie was one of only 3 people Jen trusted. Actually, she supposed it was 4 now with David. Bonnie sighed and hugged her bag to her body. Okay, there is something, she sighed again. My sister. She's moved back home. Oh no, Jen said immediately. As much as Jen knew Bonnie loved her sister, she also knew that Bonnie thought her parents favoured high-profile lawyer Andrea. Andrea lived in London. Andrea once went to a party attended by Anton de Beck. Andrea had never eaten a whole packet of Oreos for breakfast. I swear she's only done it because Mum's literally just finished redoing the spare room, and Andrea loves a bit of ochre. That can't be the only reason, Jen said, turning a little in her seat. Well, she mentioned something, and then she burst into tears. But she's always been so dramatic. Her crying about something is more on demand than BBC iPlayer. Jen had only met Andrea once. It had been at a Boxing Day meal, a pretentious spatchcock turkey gifted to Andrea by a client. And whether Bonnie's sister knew it or not, she had spent the whole meal telling everyone around the table how much better London was compared to Little Pickering. I don't even know if Jules is a real person. She's never talked about a Jules before, and suddenly she's crying like she's watching the ending of It's a Wonderful Life. Bonnie shivered. But what I do know is the thought of her being at home all the time with no end date is filling me with dread. And apparently making me talk about chocolate all the time. Then Bonnie gasped. Can I move in with you? Why didn't I think about it before? Your flat is even nearer to the vets. I'll be able to get at least 10 minutes more shut-eye before I start work. Bonnie had swapped the nursing home reception for the vet's a year ago now. According to Bonnie, it was more euthanasia but less all-round excrement. Jen felt panic starting to build, and she squeezed in her core, using that inbuilt emotion-controlling tactic she'd perfected over the years in every foster placement she'd lived in. Don't show anything. People will use it. She might trust Bonnie, but that didn't mean it always came naturally. You don't want to live with me, she said, as calmly as she could. I don't want to live with my sister, Bonnie said, her breath beginning to steam up the car window so much that the shining outline of the converted barn that housed Christmas every day began to disappear in the blur of condensation. And you're going to France in a couple of days, so if I move in then, you won't have to set your lights to come on a timer, or get Natalia to water the plants. Think, Jen, think. And then it came to her. Natalia, her assistant, another person she trusted. Actually, Natalia's moving in, Jen said, fast. Tomorrow. Bonnie went to say something else, and Jen knew she had to make it clearer. With her brothers. Bonnie screwed up her face in confusion. Was it any wonder? Because it did make zero sense, but she kept talking anyway. I needed as many elves on board for the flash mobs. Natalia's brothers are between jobs, and Natalia's house has rats. Rats? In the loft, Jen said. Horrible. A whole family of them eating away at the beams. Bonnie sat stock still, and Jen knew she'd gone too far. She stopped talking and waited for Bonnie to call her out. Jen, she began, I'm not stupid. You know that, right? She did know that. Bonnie was as switched on as the little... But Jen couldn't show weakness. She dug deep, knowing she could claw her way out of any situation. Like that family of fictional rats in the loft of a 3-bedroom terrace. What's going on? Bonnie asked. It sounds very much like you don't want me moving in with you. Jen couldn't bring herself to say anything else. She pulled at the door handle and stepped out of the car into the icy evening chill. She breathed deep, taking comfort in the bright strings of lights around the eaves of the barn, the thick spruces that marked the entrance lit up in gold, silver and green, the reindeer and sleigh made from recyclable materials. Jen, Bonnie said, out of the car too, and following her as she walked towards the barn. You're worrying me now. Don't worry, Jen said, pulling her keys from her bag and slipping a brass one into the lock on the thick wooden door. I'll put the kettle on. How long? Bonnie asked, her hands wrapped around a hot chocolate, sitting on the bright red sofa in Jen's open-plan office. Not long. Days? Weeks? Jen shook her head. Please tell me that means it's only been hours. It's been... since September, Jen said, sipping at her hazelnut coffee. Internally, she cringed. Bonnie would be hurt that she hadn't told her. But when you had spent a lifetime keeping things to yourself, it was hard to change the default. Let me get this straight, Bonnie began, taking a baby marshmallow out of the top of her mug and squeezing it between her thumb and forefinger. You moved out of your flat, and you've been living here at the office since September, and you never told me. Jen took another sip of her drink. I didn't tell anyone. Did that make it better? Jen! Apparently, it did not make it better. Jen didn't say anything else. Does David know? Jen shook her head. I said I haven't told anyone. And she hadn't been planning to tell Bonnie either. Because, after Christmas, things will hopefully be better. Hope. You always had to have hope, or what else was there? Things weren't so bad. Yes, she might have had to cut costs and move out of her flat, but she had the business, and the business had 4 display rooms with plentiful cupboards for her clothes, and one now housed a sofa bed she could squirrel away behind garlands of tinsel and a framework of candy canes. Milo, who owned the gym below, had also asked no questions when Jen said her shower at home was broken, and was it possible to use his facilities? With light, heat, her favourite pillow, her teddy bear bravely. The fancy coffee/hot chocolate machine and running water shared with martial arts enthusiasts, things could be a whole lot worse. "Is the business really in trouble?" Bonnie asked, her brown eyes studying her intently. Jen shook her head. "It's a lean spell, that's all. You know how it is. Summer is always more difficult when your speciality is Christmas." She had known that from the outset when she created the company. But Jen knew a business had to be driven by passion, and her heart was always powered by December. Yes, she could diversify, might be forced to if momentum didn't pick up, but she truly believed this situation simply required her to work harder, make people see their lives would be incomplete without an event provided by Christmas every day. Except, in a few days, she was leaving the business and all the events in Natalia's capable hands, while her boyfriend David took her to France. "You should have told me, Jen," Bonnie continued. "You should have said something before you started sleeping in a Santa cupboard." "It's not a cupboard," she protested. "You could have moved in with me." "And Andrea." "She's not there yet. In fact, if you needed somewhere to stay, then Andrea wouldn't be able to come." Jen shook her head. "I'm going to Paris, remember?" "And you really don't sound as excited as I thought you'd be about that." "Well, I've obviously got a lot on, and this is the business's busiest month, so it's not the ideal time to go away." And she had told David that, suggested they revisit the idea in the new year, but according to him, never having had a break for Christmas was as bad as never having watched Elf. "But it's Paris," Bonnie reminded her. "The pavement cafes, the Arc de Triomphe, the chocolate. Sorry." "I know," Jen said, suddenly hit with the fact that there were many people who would give all their festive roast potatoes for this kind of opportunity. "And it's David. Handsome, intelligent, funny David, the only person I've ever seen you get mushy over." Mushy. Jen wasn't sure she would recognise mushy if it pied her in the face. "Jen, he's going to propose in Paris, you know that, right?" She put her hot chocolate down on a side table, decorated with silver fir cones. "What?" Jen's heart jolted more uncomfortably than it had when Geoffrey's blood cannons had coated the nave. "You've been dating for over 6 months. It's Christmas. It's Paris. I'm telling you, he's going to ask you to marry him." Now Jen felt sick. The coffee began to push its way back up her throat. She swallowed, tried to maintain equilibrium. "It hasn't been that long." Was that all she had? Questioning the timeline of her relationship with David. And "It was June, the weekend of my mum's birthday." Jen frowned. Had it been that long? All she remembered about June was the Christmas in Summer stall she'd had at the Little Pickering Fete to drum up business, and then that phone call from the nursing home saying Kathleen had had a fall. Kathleen, another trusted friend. "Jen, trust me, you're going to come back from Paris with a rock the size of Dwayne Johnson on your finger." Jen had no idea what to say. She managed some kind of half nod. Someone asking her to marry them. David asking her to marry him. Being together forever. A family. "Jen," Bonnie said, looking at her with wide eyes now. "If David asks, you are going to say yes, right?" "Well, I mean, we haven't ever talked about anything like that." "You don't talk about things like that before the proposal. Otherwise, it wouldn't be very romantic, would it?" But if marriage was on the cards, perhaps you might have told the man you'd been dating for apparently over 6 months that you had moved into Christmas Everyday's Lapland room and were sharing showering facilities with would-be powerlifters. It was then that Jen's mobile phone erupted on the coffee table between them. A rising crescendo of Santa Baby filled the space, and a name flashed up on the screen. David. "Oh!" Bonnie exclaimed. "Here we go. He'll have arranged a Parisian winter picnic before you jet off." Jen picked up. A roaring sound, wind or perhaps rushing traffic, met her ears.
"Jen, can you hear me?"
It was David, but his voice sounded muffled and so far away. Jen stood up and stepped towards one of the windows. "Just about, but it's really noisy."
Jen, I don't know how to say this, but we're not going to be able to go to Paris on Friday. There's a work emergency, and I'm the only one qualified to sort it out. Believe me, I've really tried to get someone from HQ to step up, but it's a non-starter."
"Oh," Jen replied, disappointment arriving. "Well, can we move our flights? Go away after you've sorted out the problem?"
Or perhaps in January.
Bonnie was mouthing a shocked, "What?" and her expression of bitter disappointment was perhaps one Jen should have been echoing.
"The problem isn't here," David said. "I'm at Bristol Airport now. I've got to fly to Greece."
"Greece?" Jen said. Bonnie was now making shapes with her arms, which Jen had no idea how to decipher.
"Yeah, I know," David continued. "Athens. Not exactly Paris, is it?"
Jen had no idea what Athens was like in comparison to Paris, because travelling wasn't exactly the preferred pastime for someone who had always just a home to fit into. She went to say something, but David carried on.
"The size of this issue, I think I'm going to be there for the whole of the holidays. It's shit, I know. I'm really sorry, Jen. If there was anything I could do, then—"
Bonnie was shaking her head and looking somewhere between furious and frustrated. Jen didn't know how to react, or what was appropriate to say to someone who allegedly had been going to propose, but was now not going to see her over Christmas at all. She was seconds away from feeling relief that she could focus on the business. But there was a part of her that had been looking forward to seeing somewhere different, being treated, not working.
"Listen, I've got to go now," David said. "The gate's going to be displayed at 1:45. I'll text you, okay?"
"David, wait, give me a second to—"
"Speak later, okay? Bye."
The dial tone sounded, loud and clear. Chapter 3. Little Pickering Care Home, Little Pickering, Wiltshire, UK.
"This smells like arse."
"Kathleen, you know you're not supposed to swear like that."
"I said it smells like arse. That's not swearing, that's stating facts."
Jen couldn't help but smile as she stood at the door of the day room, where Kathleen Ockenden was vigorously shaking a forkful of food at one of the care workers. The climate inside the nursing home was in sharp contrast to the chilly weather outside, the radiators pumping the air up to Caribbean levels that had Jen unbuttoning her red coat. She stepped into the room then, passing the artificial Christmas tree decked in gold, red and a rather unfortunate yellow, and made her way over to the woman who had been more of a mother to her than any other.
"You have a visitor, Kathleen," the care worker said. "Perhaps Jen can get you eating the turkey casserole." "Pigs might fly. In fact, give that muck to the pigs and see what they make of it."
Jen smiled at the assistant and then sank down into the seat that had just been vacated. She picked up the plate and gave it a sniff. "Smells like arse, doesn't it?" Kathleen said, taking a tissue from the sleeve of her red and white spotted cardigan and wiping her nose with it. "It smells like some part of a turkey," Jen said, putting the plate back down.
"Turkey arse,"
Kathleen countered, and then she laughed, light flooding her bright blue eyes. "Causing trouble as usual, I see," Jen said, raising an eyebrow. And then her demeanour cracked. "Well done." Kathleen shook her head, white curls bouncing.
"Got to keep people on their toes, Jen. Never forget that."
Jen nodded. Keeping people on their toes was just one of the mantras that Kathleen and her late husband Gerald had passed on to her over the years since they'd first met in nearby Salisbury, had run a party shop on the high street, and from the moment a 13-year-old Jen had seen the Christmas window display, sparkling reindeer, an old-fashioned Santa Claus in a silver-edged suit, sitting in a rocking chair, real iced gingerbread men on platters. A piece of her had come alive. She'd gone inside and breathed in the scent of pine and fir trees, peppermint and caramel, her fingers tracing over the spirals of ice lights and packs of winter fancy dress, angel wings and halos, the Grinch, Santa's little helpers. Jen had wanted to soak it all up, shower in it, stay there amongst the brightness and the sequined gloriousness as it presented her with so much unequivocal joy. Instead, Gerald had chased her out with a broom, worried she was one of the delinquents who had stolen 3 wise men and a baby the day before. But the spikes of Gerald's broom on the backs of her leggings-clad calves hadn't deterred her. Salisbury might have a cathedral and fantastic coffee shops, but it was this party store that was the real attraction for her. It offered a bright, hopeful haven, amid a life that had been anything but. She'd gone back day after day, any small chance she got, until her visits got more regular, the same time of day, for longer and longer, and Kathleen started offering her something to eat and drink. "Just what we're having for our dinner," and Jen began to pitch in. "Jen, could you pass the rainbow streamers down? I've got a display to do for the Guildhall." When Gerald died some 5 years ago now, Kathleen had withered too. Within 6 months of his passing, everyday things she'd usually done with vigour became difficult, until the stairs to the apartment above fancy occasions were too much and social services were tipped off, much to Kathleen's fury. Jen had offered to help, move in, keep the shop going, but Kathleen was furious at that idea too. The only thing Kathleen hadn't been furious about was Jen pilfering as much of the stock as she wanted before the owners of the chain took everything back. It was a sad day when fancy occasions closed, had its bright window displays removed, the glass covered over with black blinds, until it became a waffle cafe. But it had also been the start of Jen's Christmas everyday venture, and she was determined to make that a success, as much for her as for Kathleen. She felt that Kathleen, seeing a little part of something like fancy occasions, was what kept her going. "Have you come to remind me you're going to Paris?" Kathleen asked, poking a gnarled finger at her water glass, as if she wanted to transform it into a glass of sherry. "No," Jen said. "I've just come because I always come to see you." She sighed. "And Paris, it's off." "Off?" Kathleen said. Jen nodded. "David has to work." "But he booked this trip. What happened? Did he forget to ask for the time away?" Jen filled Kathleen in about the work emergency and David's trip to Greece. "Sounds like poppycock to me," Kathleen said bluntly, folding her arms across her chest. "Sounds as if he's leading you down the garden path." That had always been one of Kathleen's favourite phrases, along with something about not casting a clout until May was out. Jen still didn't know what that meant. Should she tell Kathleen that Bonnie thought the garden path might be leading to a proposal? She went to say something, still a little unsure exactly what, when Kathleen carried on. "Only one way to find out, really." "Ask him if he's serving poppycock," Jen suggested with a half-smile. "Tell him you'll go with him," Kathleen said. Then she pointed a finger. "Or, better still, surprise him. Turn up in Greece without saying anything." Jen was already shaking her head. She hated surprises. Yes, her business quite often carried the element of surprise, festive birthdays, anniversaries, and no shortage of proposals. But that was fine, because those were surprises for other people. When it came to the unexpected, Jen's life had never been blessed with the happier end of the surprise spectrum. Surprise, you're moving foster placements again. Surprise, no one remembered your birthday. Surprise, not knowing Bible quotes could mean you miss out on dinner. "I wouldn't ever do that," Jen replied. "Besides, David's got to solve this work issue. It's not going to be the same as being in Paris when he doesn't have computer or technical things to fix." "What is it then?" Kathleen asked, an eyebrow raised and slanting with suspicion. "What exactly has happened that only King David can fix?" Jen's mind went back to that telephone conversation. What had David actually told her was wrong? "Well, he didn't elaborate because I don't know much about what he does," Jen said. "And what does he do exactly?" "Important things with computer servers." "Ah," Kathleen said, picking up the fork bearing turkey bits. "Computers. The things meant to show us the world so we don't have to visit places in person. And he's had to go to Greece." Her laugh tinkled. Now Jen felt that Kathleen thought she was stupid. That wool was being pulled over her eyes somehow. Another Kathleen saying. Was it? Why hadn't David given her a better explanation? He hadn't even given her a second to ask him anything, and there had been no text from him yet. But she also knew Kathleen had never liked David. He had been the only boyfriend she'd introduced to her, and afterwards, all Kathleen had said was, "Very charming. Very, very charming." 3 verys meant, "Tell you what," Kathleen said, twiddling the fork a little. "I'll eat some of this arse if you promise to get to the bottom of David's issues." She paused. "The computer ones, at least." Jen was about to shake her head, but then she reconsidered. She knew Kathleen would be snacking on tuck crackers later. She really didn't want anything to intrude, but she'd rather have her eating something else. That was more important than a broken server or whatever it was. "Keep people on their toes, Jen," Kathleen reminded her. "Like I said." "Eat your turkey," Jen encouraged. "I'll call David. Find out what's going on." "Good," Kathleen said, putting the fork in her mouth and immediately pulling a face as if it was the most awful substance known to man. "Now, let me tell you about what happened at the church today." "Did Edna Warren get struck down by a godly lightning bolt while she was singing in the bleak midwinter?" Believe it or not, it was far more dramatic than that. Chapter 4. Greg's, Little Pickering, Wiltshire, UK. "Elf number 3 was the best," Bonnie said, sinking her teeth into a chocolate-loaded bun that was drizzling maple syrup. It was the next morning, and Jen, Natalia and Bonnie had been conducting interviews for more seasonal elves. Jen had a good team of all-year-round elves, reindeer and Santas, plus Geoffrey's group of actors, and for anything specialised, she brought in outside help on an ad hoc basis. However, come December, there weren't just more events, but bigger events, and that meant a larger number of employees, hence temporary staff.
"Elf number 3 look like Vladimir Putin. No one want to look at Vladimir Putin over brandy pudding,"
Natalia answered, not even looking up from her iPad, which was balanced on her lap. Bonnie gasped, as if she'd just been witness to a discovery that was going to change the planet forever. "Oh my God, Natalia, you're right! I knew he reminded me of someone."
"Only villain role for this man. Herod, Grinch, Scrooges."
Jen sipped her drink. A caramel latte without the caramel or the latte. A black coffee she was imagining tasted better, because skipping a couple of these luxuries was keeping money in her company's bank account. The only reason they were having these meetings here, and not at the office, was because she hadn't had time to deconstruct the sofa bed, and because she liked to challenge her potential staff to perform a little in public. If they couldn't pretend to be an elf in front of her, Natalia, and today Bonnie, plus Greg, and members of the Little Pickering Knitting Circle, then they weren't ready to take the performance to her clients. "I agree with Natalia about elf number 3, Jen said. Natalia concluded. Between the not caramel not latte and a plate containing a chocolate and coconut flapjack Bonnie had also bought, Jen's phone vibrated, and a text message appeared on the screen. "It's David," Bonnie said, leaning forward before Jen could. "Thanks, Bonnie," Jen said, swiping the phone up.
"He has fixed thing that is broken?" Natalia asked. "He fly from Greece to Paris and meet there?"
Both her best friend and her very capable assistant seemed incredibly invested in the contents of this text message. Jen held her phone, but did nothing further. She had tried to call David last night, after she had moved nutcrackers and silver swans, in order to set up her bed, but there had been no answer. After 5 other tries, and still no response, she'd left him a voicemail. The text was going to be in reply to that.
"Why you not open message?"
Natalia asked. "I am," Jen said. "I will."
"Now or in New Year?"
Natalia asked. "Oh, there's another one," Bonnie said. Her friend had goo from the bun all over her chin, and could apparently still see the screen of Jen's phone, despite the fact Jen was half shielding it. Why was she half shielding it? "It's a photo of Greece," Bonnie declared very loudly. So much so, some of the knitters in their midst almost lost stitches.
"Is not picture of inside of computer mainframe, because he is working?" Natalia added.
No, it wasn't wires and motherboards, it was ruins. The famous ones with a name that wasn't coming to Jen straight away. Columns of ancient stone against a ludicrously blue sky. She went on to read the message that accompanied it.
Stepped out to get lunch and this is the view. Not the same without you.
As Jen let David's words settle on her, she realised that Bonnie had got up and was standing behind her. Stepped out to get lunch and this is the view. Not the same without you, Bonnie read aloud. There was a collective "Oh" from the knitting ladies and Greg, who was now leaning his elbows on the counter, as if he hadn't been making more muffins, but had been paying attention to this instead. I told you, Bonnie exclaimed. He misses you. He was going to propose on this trip.
He was going to give you a ring?
Natalia asked, stopping the iPad slipping from her lap. Jen shook her head. No, I mean, that's just Bonnie's theory. You should go to Greece, Bonnie said, still at full volume. It might not be Paris, but if David's got time to take photos of scenery like that, he's going to have time to take you up to a rooftop restaurant and get on one knee. And Paris, I mean, everyone does it there, not everyone does it in Athens.
I do it outside British Embassy, Natalia informed them.
Jen couldn't accept the scrutiny from everyone around her. Kathleen had said,
keep people on their toes and go to Greece.
But equally, Jen knew her old friend didn't trust David for some reason. Should she be taking action? Leaving the UK for somewhere as planned? Or would she be wiser to stay here at the helm of her business? I take it back, Bonnie carried on. You shouldn't go to Greece. We should go to Greece. It makes perfect sense. You can go off and do romantic stuff with David when he has a break from the heroic CPR of laptops or whatever it is he's doing. And then, when he has to work, we can tour Athens and see how they celebrate Christmas. Meaning I don't have to spend a second with Andrea.
Greece have good food, Natalia said. Better than snails of French.
I had a Greek boyfriend once, one of the knitting ladies commented. He was very inventive. Suddenly, Greggs felt as hot as a building whose foundations were on the equator. Jen made for the door and a bit of little Pickering drizzle. Once outside, she leaned her head against the glass of the Christmas window display she always helped Greg change up each year. Angels were holding miniature cakes and sausage rolls on shiny silver platters, sitting on a small version of the food truck Greg brought out when he went mobile for events. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Natalia was a fantastic assistant, and everything had been arranged around this trip to Paris. It might not be Paris. David might have to work most of the time. But as today's photo proved, they could have moments together in Greece. Maybe spontaneity was what was needed. Maybe taking a chance would get rid of any doubt she had about the relationship. Jen lifted her head off the glass and eyeballed a festive mouse in a ballet tutu. Don't be afraid to fail, because failure or success means the same thing. You were brave enough to try. That quote had been on a picture in her first social worker's office. She had stared at it for hours one day when they were trying to find somewhere else for her to go. She didn't always feel brave, but she definitely always tried. She wiped a finger over the window. She'd made a decision. Chapter 5. Athens International Airport, Eleftherios Venizelos, Athens, Greece. Look at the decorations! Jen, look, you could basically hold a Christmas event in this airport. It's so much better than that lame stack of presents and a few fairy lights at Luton. Bonnie heaved in a breath, still pointing at the ceiling. There are stars and sparkles and gold moons. As Bonnie continued to list off, Jen zoned her friend's voice out and tried to ground her thoughts. She was in Greece, Athens. She had let Bonnie book and pay for a flight here, plus a room at a hotel called Plaka. Apart from creating a Christmas company from the ground up, it was, without doubt, the craziest thing Jen had ever done. The day before yesterday, she was interviewing for elf positions, and now she was in another country clutching her new acquired for the Paris trip blue British passport. She took a deep breath and looked at the sliding glass doors ahead of her, opening and closing as people arrived or departed. The centre of Athens, and their hotel was a metro or taxi ride away. Presumably, this was where David was based, as he had taken a photo of the ruins Jen now knew was the Parthenon on top of the Acropolis. She had replied to his text and the photo, under Bonnie and Natalia's scrutiny and with their input. "Wish I was there." Why 4 words needed so much thinking about, Jen hadn't been sure, but in the end she had sent it, while Natalia and Bonnie were still arguing back and forth about what emojis should be added. 3 hours later, and Jen had a reply.
"Me too. Kiss."
For Bonnie, that had been the game changer that powered her into woman on a mission mode. Wizz Air flights had been booked, the hotel had been found, and somehow, using the kind of persuasive skills only Bonnie seemed to possess, she had talked retiree Susan, who Bonnie had replaced at the vet's, into coming back for a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, at Christmas every day, Natalia was already ready to take the reindeer by the antlers and steer the business through December. Jen knew she had been desperate to decapitate the festive Russian dolls on Jen's desk, ever since one of their happy clients had sent them. Suddenly, Bonnie was clamping her arm. "You okay? Not having second thoughts, are you?" Jen wasn't sure she had really had first thoughts, and now, as she fished her phone out of the pocket of her trolley case, the only thing she was thinking about was why her phone still hadn't connected to any network. "Because I am loving the Greek festive vibe," Bonnie continued. "There's the music and the decorated trees, and we aren't even out of the airport yet. I have a feeling that Athens is going to give London a run for its money." Bonnie was excited. Bonnie was the kind of excited Jen should be. This wasn't what she did, jetting off on a whim, jetting off at all. She was content wrapping herself up in the Christmassy glow she'd created in Little Pickering, where she felt safe. Being here was a step into the unknown. "Taxi or metro?" Bonnie asked. A taxi sounded more expensive, and Jen had to be frugal. Although, at the end of yesterday's visit, Kathleen had dipped into her handbag and produced a wad of cash and that Jen had changed into euros at Greg's. But it was her definite intention to pay it back. "Right, I'll decide," Bonnie said, pulling Jen towards the glass doors. "I say taxi, I'll pay." "Bonnie, you can't pay for everything. You paid for the flights. I know you paid Greg to take us to the airport and you have no idea how grateful I am for an escape from living with my sister for a week." She gave Jen's arm a squeeze. "No idea, okay? So, roll with it. Besides, as soon as we catch up with David, I'm sure his credit card might be able to swing a Greek dinner." Jen didn't have a chance to say anything else before a gust of actually quite warm air whirled around them, and they were outside the airport, underneath the crazily blue winter sky. Chapter 6. Bar Pame Pla, Athens, Greece.
"One special meze and extra dolmades, a gift from us."
Astro Salvas gave a smile to the 3 customers, then laid the 2 huge platters of food on the table. As expected, a gasp of appreciation met the air, directed towards the mix of meatballs, sausages, chicken and pork souvlaki, crispy feta parcels sprinkled with sesame seeds, pita breads and homemade chips. As soon as he had turned from the table and was heading back towards the bar, his smile dropped. His uncle Philippos, the bar's owner, was on a stepladder, twisting tinsel around the iconic stone surround in front of the beer taps. With the bar more cave than cafe, with its stone walls and bottles resting on holes carved out of the rock, it was both traditional and cosy, as much as it was contemporary and funky. And garish Christmas decorations had no place here.
"What are you doing?"
Astro snapped.
"Before you say anything," Philippos began, I have already said something," Astro interrupted. "I asked what you are doing." "Astro, have you seen the other bars and restaurants? They have had decorations everywhere since the middle of November."
Philippos was still standing on the ladder. 2 of the steps warped close to breaking, half the tinsel in his hand, half trailing across the stones like an ugly, glittery worm.
"I try not to look," Astro answered. "Why do you think I wear my hood up from the middle of November until we are in the new year?"
Philippos dropped his hold on the worm garland and it drooped.
"Astro, it has been 17 years, he sighed. But I know that the passing of time does not change anything. And I also know this season may not be as lucrative as the summertime, but Greece wants to be an all-year destination. They advertise a Greek winter. More people, they come.
He paused, wet his lips.
Your mother, she would want us not to miss out on these opportunities. In the time she had with us, she would seize everything coming her way, no?
Astro had frozen to the spot the second Philippos had said 17 years. 100 years could have passed. It made no difference. His mother had died on Christmas Day when he had been just 7 years old. On that Christmas Eve, she had read him a story about St. Vasilis, kissed him good night, tucking the bed covers around him and tickling his neck the way she always had, and left him with the babysitter while she went to work. He had never seen her alive again. An aneurysm, they'd said, something growing inside her she had never known about. He hadn't understood what that was at 7, but he had looked into it later. Often, Astro wondered if she had known about the weak spot, or at least sensed that something was wrong, but had put off going to see the doctor, or, more likely, was unable to get an appointment around her waitressing job. The memories he had of his mother always involved her trying to juggle a multitude of things: her work, taking him to school, fun, low-cost trips with him at the weekends, more work. That Christmas morning, when Philippos had arrived at their apartment, red-eyed, his then short, dark beard speckled with the light snow that was falling, Astro had known that his life was going to change. It was like suddenly realising that everything that had gone before was only a too short preparation for what was to come.
No.
Astro said the one word a little too loudly, and it was tinged with anger and despair. But he held his ground, his green eyes fixed on his uncle, wanting to make his point totally clear, needing to see that golden trail of disgustingness fall back into whatever box it had come from.
Astro.
He changed tack, trying to nullify the feelings that were crawling up over him like a clutter of spiders.
Bar Pame is not like anywhere else the rest of the year. Why does it have to be like everywhere else now? He forced a smile. What happened to individuality, our bar being unique?
By the expression on Philippos's face, Astro had a feeling that this approach wasn't working either. He found he had nothing else to say. The radio began to play, something with jingling bells, and it set his teeth on edge.
My bar,
Philippos began, one foot hitting the rung below on the ladder,
needs every cent it can get. Or I might have to let Marjorie go before the new year.
What?
That is business, Astro. And I'm afraid if I do not make this place into a grotto that St. Vasilis would be proud of, then tourists looking for the festive spirit are going to find it somewhere with decorations I do not have.
When Philippos stepped on the next rung of the ladder, it gave way, sending him sprawling to the floor. At the same time, the golden sliver of tinsel unstuck itself.
Are you okay?
Astro asked, offering out a hand. Philippos gave a grunt, heaving himself up from the floor and brushing the garland away from his mouth.
The decorations are going up, Astro, be it today or tomorrow. And by the end of this week, the Christmas music will be loud. There will be serviettes with holly berries on them, and melomakurena will be going on the menu.
Astro bit the inside of his lip. That Greek treat was as festive as it got. There were cookies with honey, cinnamon, cloves and nutmeg. He had made a cupcake variation with his mother the year she died, and he had got so much syrup in his hair, she had to cut pieces out of his fringe. Now he was going to have to serve it to their customers. The thought made him want to vomit. He stamped his foot down on the tinsel snake.
Fuck this time of year.
Chapter 7. Hotel Pla Pla, Athens, Greece. It had taken around 45 minutes to get from the airport to the hotel through quite substantial traffic. But Jen had felt her shoulders relax a little as they passed the sparkling Christmas decorations en route. Despite the warmth compared to England, this city was geared up for the winter season. From the tall, decorated spruces on the corner of dramatic marble squares to large, twinkling, almost stage sets of stars hanging above the carriageways below those ruins David had sent a photo of, the Parthenon. There it was now in late evening, lit up and glowing, against the clear, darkening sky. From where they sat on the hotel roof terrace, a carafe of red wine on the table, it was like somehow being part of classical civilization. And tonight, Jen would be sleeping in a king-size bed next to Bonnie and Bonnie's multitude of chocolate snacks she had tipped out of her cabin bag. Or was she going to be at a different hotel, in a different bed, with David? Jen's eyes went to her phone that was next to the rather delicious oaky red wine. "Still nothing?" Bonnie asked. "No," Jen said, wrapping her hands around the wine glass. She sighed, feeling a tension invade her neck muscles. And then she said what was actually on her mind. "It's a bit weird, isn't it?" "Well, he did say he was working all the time." "I know, but people have to go to the toilet, don't they? And have you ever peed and not checked your phone afterwards, in that minute or so after washing your hands and getting back to work?" "To be honest," Bonnie said, fingers walking their way towards the Bombay mix they'd been given with their drinks, "I'm usually checking my phone, even when I'm meant to be looking at the weekly diabetes readings for Mrs. Curtis's Jack Russell." So why hasn't David answered my calls and messages? Jen was asking the universe as much as Bonnie or the Greek gods, who all seemed within touch. "Remember that David doesn't know you're here yet," Bonnie said, then took a sip of her drink, looking like she hung out on Greek roof terraces on a regular basis. "He thinks you're coordinating the latest Christmas proposal or a cranberry product launch back in the UK. Was her sense of urgency because she was here and not there? Because she had acted on a whim and didn't yet know how David was going to react? Or was it a generalised feeling that his delays in responding was something much more than his work issues? There had been times when he had gone radio silent for whole weekends, but he had always eventually replied with a valid excuse. But for some reason this felt different. Well, how long do I give it? I mean, what if he doesn't respond at all tonight? Or in the morning? Because I don't know the name of his hotel or where the company's based here or... Bonnie lifted her phone from her jumper-clad midriff where it was residing, attached to a lanyard around her neck. "But you know the name of the company he works for, right? So we can just search it up and get an address." Jen shook her head. "God, it sounds stalkerish now." "Give me the name of the company. We don't have to call them or hunt them down or do anything tonight, but on the very slim off chance that David doesn't answer until the morning, we'll have somewhere we can head to tomorrow." This was Bonnie being super sensible. It didn't always happen naturally. Jen took a glug of the wine and sat back in her seat, enjoying the sensation of warmth and not having to wear her fit for -30 degrees coat over her long-sleeved top. "It's tech specs." "You're going to have to spell that for me," Bonnie replied. A few moments later, and Bonnie still seemed to be looking. Such an uneasy feeling had taken hold of Jen. She put her wine on the table and sat forward in her seat. "Can't you find it? Did you spell it right?" "Yes, I did. It's probably Safari playing up. It's all ads and suggestions you don't need these days, isn't it?" Jen could sense the panic in her voice, and her fingers sought not the nibbles, but her own phone, the display still black as the night. "OK, let's think logically," Bonnie said. "What? You never think logically. You're the girl who still thinks there's a chance that Cillian Murphy's going to walk into Greg's one day and order a toastie." "It could happen." And whilst Jen had distracted Bonnie with that thought, she was going to search for tech specs herself. There it was, muted greys and red, a bit like if the Terminator had designed a tech company website. Our offices. Jen began to look down the list, alphabetised by country. Belgium, France, United Kingdom. Where was Greece? She might have dipped in and out of many schools along her educational path, but she knew that Greece should be right after Germany. And even if whoever made the website was alphabetically challenged, it should be there somewhere. It wasn't. There was nothing. Jen shivered as the temperate weather clashed with the ice-cold concern, chilling her insides. "You didn't find an office in Athens," Jen stated. Her voice was like something from a sat-nav, stating facts and directions, emotionless. "No," Bonnie said. "But, websites can be out of date. Or it could be a new office. Like, maybe they took over another company called something else previously, and that's why they're having this big problem with whatever David's been called in to fix, and—" Jen wondered how long Bonnie could keep talking. She got to her feet and walked to the edge of the roof terrace. Leaning on the surround, she looked out over the city as her brain tried to fill in the blanks. Greenery almost entirely covered the wall opposite, and iron bistro tables and chairs were set out on the tiles of a neighbouring terrace. There being no office for tech specs in Athens was one thing. Yet the idea that David wasn't working here but doing something else entirely was another thing altogether. Or was he even here at all? Had she travelled 4 hours to get somewhere to see someone who was somewhere else? Now her mind was whirring, and Bonnie was still talking as if she was in charge of relationship algorithms. "He's lied to me," Jen interrupted. "We don't know that yet." "Come on, Bonnie," she said, walking back towards the table, where she picked up her glass of wine and slugged back the contents. "We've flown all this way, and he's not answering my phone calls or my messages. And what might have started out sounding like a cool surprise is now feeling like a huge mistake." She slumped down into her chair. Now there was emotion. Now she felt completely stupid, in the middle of unfamiliar circumstances she had no control over. She hated feeling like that. It took her right back to all those many authority figures making decisions about her welfare. "It's not a mistake," Bonnie said quickly, getting up and dragging her chair around the table until it was alongside Jen's. "This is an unexpected glitch in the programme, that's all." "Computer and maintenance talk, Bonnie. Not okay." "Sorry, I just meant that there has to be more to it, and we are literally jumping to conclusions just because Tech Specs doesn't have an office here." Bonnie had made the last sentence sound like she was saying, just because